All right, who's with us? Let's see. I think you guys are. I can hear you. I think that's John.
All right, guys.
I think we're having some lag. Is that just me? Can you guys?
All right, who's with us?
Let's see. I think you guys are. I can hear you. I think that's John.
All right, guys.
I think we're having some lag. Is that just me?
Can you guys? All right, who's with us?
Let's see. I think you guys are. I can hear you. I think that's John.
All right, guys.
Anybody else? Take a look at the chat box over
I think we're having some lag.
there.
Is that just me? Can you guys? All right, who's with us?
Let's see. I think you guys are. I can hear you. I think that's John.
All right, guys.
Anybody else? Take a look at the chat box over
I think we're having some lag.
there.
Is that just me? Can you guys? All right, who's with us?
Let's see. I think you guys are. I can hear you. I think that's John.
All right, guys.
Anybody else? Take a look at the chat box over
I think we're having some lag.
Is that just me?
Can you guys? All right, who's with us?
Okay, raise your hand if you can hear me. Oh, good. We've got 3 seconds of lag. Well, we can work with that. I don't know if I can fix the focus on this, but you're not missing much. It's just me. So, who all is in attendance tonight? You want to just... Oh, thanks, Sean. Okay, raise your hand if you can hear me. Oh, it's doing it again. It's looping. The audio is looping. Oh, good. We've got 3 seconds of lag. Well, we can work with that. I don't know if I can fix the focus on this, but you're not missing much. It's just me.
What kind of echo do we get? No echo? Yeah. That's interesting.
Okay, I can hear you guys.
Nice. Can you hear me?
Sure can.
So you're actually on the TV speaker, so everybody can hear, and then your audio's getting piped back in from my laptop.
Okay.
And it's working.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And how many of us are...
Ta-da!
Hello. I don't believe I've met you, Brian.
I don't think we've met.
Well, greetings from Little Elm. I was on my way out there tonight, and I got pulled over maybe 10 minutes down the road. It's a Little Elm cop to let me know that my phone was out and that he wouldn't give me a ticket if I would allow him to escort me back home. So that's the story. I'm sticking to it. All right. I can't hear you guys because I was getting a lot of my own audio from your feed. I guess you could probably tell, John. You're a very intuitive fellow. I hope, Brian, that you were coming more for the Pearl 5 than the Pearl 6 tonight because it appears that Patrick wasn't able to make it. He has a very busy schedule and a very, how should I say, busy home life as well. So sometimes he's not able to make our meetings, and we do miss him. We were going to go over the same stuff we went over last month because we anticipated that we would have a larger, more diverse audience this month because we were starting at our regular opening slot, as it were. Now, I see we've got 3 of us in attendance and maybe bad karma because I screwed up and didn't make it out there. But I'd hoped that we would have Stacy, and some of our other regulars. But I guess not. Brian, since you came to our meeting, and we want to extend a really warm welcome to you, and again, my apologies that I'm not there. Since you are here, and I haven't met you yet, and you're probably a first-timer, we will tailor our meeting tonight towards you and what questions you have. If you did come here with interest about Moose, then we can talk about Moose, which is meta-object-oriented protocol for Perl. It's a mop. It's basically what Perl is missing and that other languages have implemented, and Perl 6 has got it. So, Brian, what would you like to talk about tonight? What would you like to learn or discuss?
Pearl 5 and Moose, as far as I'm concerned. I understand how Pearl 6 has the Moose kind of built into it, but that's why I came. I came to learn what I can about Moose, because I haven't made the leap to Pearl 6 yet. I know a lot of people haven't.
Yeah, very few.
So that's fine with me. And it's not my first time. I guess this is my 3rd or 4th meeting that I've been to.
I think this is a 3rd meeting I've missed, so maybe I miss it every time. Okay, well, we can definitely go ahead and talk about Moose, and I've got a document that we can run through. Dexter, you probably still have your unvimified copy of the Moose document that we went over last month. I'm gonna just open it up. I mean, because I had it in the PDF and we were gonna go over it. I wasn't planning to execute it line by line so much as discuss it. How familiar are you? How familiar is everybody with object orientation? Should we talk about that before we dive into Moose? Because Moose is all about implementing object-oriented Perl in a way that's sane and elegant. So
I really don't know how to answer that. You know, I don't. I mean, I understand what object orientation is, basically.
Yes.
But I read through some of the stuff on Moose on CPAN before I came today, and I guess it's just a matter for me of just putting it to practice. I think that's how I would learn the ins and outs of it better. I'm not sure. Is Perl really a good object-oriented language? I mean, if I want to do object-oriented computer programming, do I want to do it in Perl, or do I want to pick up a different computer language?
Okay, I'll be brutally honest with you there. Perl was developed contemporaneously with Python in the 90s, and so they kind of bolted on features as versions went. Python 3000 has had a better adoption rate than Perl 6 has. Perl 6, nobody wants to go to it because Perl 5 is so fantastic at doing what it does. That's the truth. It's meta-object protocol, and it's... Sorry, let me mute Jesse. Thanks for joining, Jesse. The object-oriented features of Perl are just that. They're bolted on, as some people say. That's kind of harsh to say it, but that doesn't mean that Perl can't offer you a wonderfully and beautifully elegant and exquisite, delicious object-oriented language and all the features that go with it, especially with Moose. There are a lot of frameworks that are even built around Moose. For example, if you're doing web programming, like I do, I frequently do web applications, not just CGI scripts, but actual web applications. These things are built on Moose, and because of that, they have a lot of syntactic sugar and a lot of little extra features that you can use that really come in handy. If you've ever worked with wood or metal or anything like that, if you have a toolbox, just a few minutes ago I was using my toolbox and I reached for a tool that I rarely use. But I looked at it and I said, dang, man, I would be in a real tight pinch right now trying to fix my neighbor's chair, which I was doing, if I didn't have this wrench, because this is the exact wrench that I need for this bolt right here, and no other wrench that I have, and trust me, I have many, no other wrench that I have will do the job. And so some of those little extra features in Moose are, you can dig deep and you can get those little special tools that really come in handy. I mean, they can let you do wonderful things, create crazy things. I'm too much for me to cover in just a couple sentences, but the core of Moose is just what you read on CPAN. It's pretty much that. There are things to be learned by looking at examples of other people's code. So we're going to go through some examples tonight, and we're going to open up a document. It's got syntax highlighting and everything, so you can see the code. And putting it into practice is the leap that you need to make to understand one simple fact, that Moose is easy. It is not hard. It is not hard at all. It actually makes things easier, and when people look at your code, when people look at my Moose code, I'm like, yeah, it really isn't that complicated. It's actually quite simple. You could do that too. Yes, you could. Don't fire me. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get John's take on Moose, because he was going to respond as well. Can we unmute John?
So, I was going to say that as far as object-oriented goes, Perl with Moose is, like Tommy said, is really good and it's really easy to use. But core Perl object-oriented is sometimes very confusing. There's it's just there's really no reason to do it that way.
You're talking about Perl 6?
No, just core Perl 5 has objects
Right.
built in, like you said. They're sort of been slapped in. It's sort of a hack, but they are Perl objects. And what Moose does behind the scenes is implement those Perl objects, but interfacing with it and creating your own objects is a little kludgy. Moose makes everything easier.
Catalyst with Moose?
Yes.
Yeah, I've used Catalyst a little bit. So,
Yeah. So when these guys say that it's slapped on, they're professional.
We lost you, John. I'm missing all that wonderful talk. Unmute.
To you, but and it's fine, right? So your question was, is Perl a good language to start using object-oriented, right?
right.
And if you don't know any other language, yes. If you're already up to speed on another language, then that may be the better one to use because you're already there, right? But if you need something, that's super flexible, super extensible, can create a little tiny script or can create a huge line of business application. But yeah, Perl is in general just as good as almost any other language you can mention.
I'll also say that it's got some features like Moose, and the Moose and Perl 6 objects sort of are very similar.
Right.
They have different syntax, but they're similar. And from my exploration in other programming languages, Perl has some things implemented like roles, which are not part of other object systems.
I mean, the CPAN, I noticed that they talk about roles and, of course, classes and objects, but then they hit the roles, and I'm like, I don't think I've heard that before.
Yeah, roles are actually really cool.
Yeah.
So I would say yes, Perl is a great object-oriented language to use.
Yeah. And the only difference there between 5 and 6 is that 6, they're developing 5, they're adding, tacking on via Moose, right, and others, the object-oriented features, and then in 6, they're like, yeah, it's a good idea, so they put it in 6 natively.
Yeah.
But also, it goes through a whole process, of saying, this is the object-oriented nature that we want. Because there's more than one, there's Moose, and then there's Moo, and then, there's a bunch of different flavors of object-oriented actually on Perl. And that can be a good thing or a bad thing. But there's no one true, really, there's like the most popular one.
Right.
And in Perl 6, it's in the language.
I see.
Right. So that can be a little bit easier sometimes. So, does that answer?
I have to figure out which one to use. A lot of times that's a problem.
So with these different packages for object-oriented in Perl 5, Moose is the de facto standard. And the only reason you would use a different one is if you have certain requirements for maybe like speed or memory.
Right.
Because a lot of those other ones were created to solve issues that people were having with startup time, if they're have like really critical timing or memory usage or something like that. Moose, when it first came out, was real slow, and so they started developing more lightweight versions of Moose, and that's why you have Moo and Mouse and stuff. And those were they're implementing the Moose interface up to a certain point so that, or so they were implementing Moose itself up to a certain point that met 90% of their needs, or of your needs for object-oriented, but didn't have the rest of what Moose had that was causing it to be slower.
I might say to a certain depth.
Yeah.
There you go.
So that's why there's a lot of other ones. There's also some other projects where they're attempting to write it in such a way that it can be added to the Perl 5 core, but I think that
yeah, P5 mop is working.
3 different rewrites at this point, and they haven't found a good solution for it yet.
No, P5 mop is working.
Around. I don't know.
Moose is the most popular. It's got the most documentation. It's got the most examples.
Yeah.
If you start with that,
and it's actually a lot faster now, so it works pretty well.
So, the most popular wins to a certain extent.
Well, you know, I don't know. I've always had trouble like learning Java, JavaScript. I know a little C++. I'm real comfortable with C, but trying to make that leap to, you know, I don't know. I just need to press on and do it. And I'm real comfortable with Perl, so I guess Moose is the game.
Yeah. We'll switch back to Tommy. I mean, if that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yes, I'd also add a few things. I would add that, yes, in the beginning Moose was slow, but it got a really bad rap. And it's a stigma that has remained with it for some reason, but it is not slow. And I proved that last winter. We had a hackathon. We hosted a hackathon, our group, our Perl Mongers group. As you probably know, there's Perl Monger groups all over the world, and we're just one of them. So we hosted a hackathon, and we had people from Australia, Canada, places in Asia. Did we have somebody from Hawaii? We had people from all over the States. So, yeah, there was a lot of participation, and the problem that had to be solved in this hackathon was, here's a massive file system. We want you to deduplicate it and find all duplicate files. Find and list all duplicate files, and we provided them with a template output format. So, you know, if you got the right result set, your answer will look like this, and you can diff the output against the solution set, and it will work or it won't. Well, we had some crazy cool optimizations going on, and we had different implementations. We had people go off in the weeds saying, I've got a better way than using Perl hashes, and maybe that would have worked if we're, you know, hacked on for more than a month. I don't know. What was it? I think it was like Bloom something. Bloom tables, maybe. Anyhow, I provided the basic solution program that says here's an application. You can run this application. It will give you the right result. And it wasn't very optimized. Secretly, just because I'm a geek, I took my program and forked it and developed it while everybody else was hacking. And when the chips fell where they may, you know, when everything was tallied up and all the times were in and everybody's execution time was measured and memory usage was measured and everything, I measured mine, and mine was the fastest, and I used Moose. There you go. What it came down to was that we were trying to do something that lasted several seconds, sometimes minutes, and so the spin-up time for Moose was negligible, and the overhead of runtime once Moose is compiled in is extremely fast. And as we've mentioned already, those compile time issues have been solved with Moose. So we've got a great Perl loves you. Perl wants you to use it, and when you see how easy it is to use Moose, you're going to be like, oh, crazy. So I'm just going to say a couple things. I know I'm taking up yeah, I know, John. I know I'm taking up a bit of extra airtime. But I want to say that I learned about object orientation from a guy named Damian Conway, who wrote a book called Object-Oriented Perl. I learned that back, it had to have been maybe 2001, maybe 2002, probably earlier than that, probably 2001. And I was reading it, and that was the old school Perl object-oriented style, and I fell in love with it. I loved it. I still do. I think it's great. The only deal is it's people say, well, why program in C when you've got C++ over here and it can do all of this stuff? Well, because sometimes you want to stick with C because you want that low-level optimization. You want those low-level capabilities that you don't get when you jump up to C++. That's a terrible example, but as I was saying, I learned this object-oriented style from Damian Conway in his book, and what stuck with me the most was not the code, but the concepts that problems can be approached really easily when using an object-oriented methodology. And so you have to kind of get yourself in that mindset. When you look at a problem, you have to figure out how to group things and classify them. And after that, it becomes very easy. You are able to program like a human instead of think like, twiddling bits and turning switches on and off. So Damian Conway's example was an ATM machine. He wanted to implement an ATM machine, so he showed us how to create a Perl ATM machine object. And he said, do certain things, and so we would send input to the ATM machine, and we would see what it would get us. And so we built, by the end of the book, an ATM machine, and it was the object, and we implemented other objects like a keypad. And he taught us about inheritance and whatnot, but every single problem that I've had to deal with could be classified in, fall into two categories. One, quick and dirty script, procedural, bam, 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 series of commands. Or an application where you have a complex problem that you need to reduce to something that makes sense. And then once you've reduced it to make something that makes sense, in other words, objects with names and classes, capabilities, attributes, and methods, once you've done this, then programming becomes a joy, and it's fun, and it makes sense to the human mind again. So I'm going to see if we can't get the Google Drive app open here. Or you know what? It was easier to just do the screen share, wasn't it? I tried to do Google Drive before. Do you still have the code? Okay, Dexter, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm going to select your screen, so you get the broadcast time. Sweet, you got it open with the syntax highlighting and everything. You have reformatted my Perl. Okay, let's unmute John. I can't unmute him.
Is anyone there? Nothing's happening. I'll just go back to not speaking Wonderland.
Okay, my audio is live. That's cool. What I want to do is I want to switch over to John Dexter. So I'm gonna mute me. You, John, you unmute, and I'll be able to hear what you guys are talking about. I mean, John, Dex, you heard what I said last time when I ran through the code. You wanted, you're welcome to do the walkthrough. Very qualified.
Okay. So this is an example of a Moose object-oriented program that Tommy came up with that I think he was using for interview purposes. And
Awesome.
all right, so we'll just step through it real quick. So you start, usual use strict use warnings, and use 5.0.17, which is kind of an odd version. But really, I don't think you have to use these 3 lines at the top because I believe Moose automatically implements use strict and use warnings, and you would only do the version in case you needed some certain features for that version. Let's see. So start a new package namespace called person, right? And that's what's going to encapsulate your object. And then so within that, use Moose, which sets up all of the syntactic sugar. They call essentially it's a lot of extra functions and stuff to make creating the objects easier. And so every object has attributes and behaviors, right? So you have your attributes, which are, in this case, for a person, they have a first name, a last name, middle name, age, and weight, and also some just extras.
So Tommy wants to make sure we mention that Move doesn't have a type system or type checking. To make sure we point out the types.
Okay, so
That's not a Perl keyword. That's like
the
a
has,
Moose. Yeah.
yes, that is part of Moose. So
Okay.
has is implemented through Moose, and you pass a hash to, so
Right.
has, and that's your attribute, and then you can pass a hash to that, and you can call, these are like functions within that attribute. So you can tell it that this is or first name is and str is a string type. So, and then you can tell it is required, it's not lazy, and we'll go through lazy, and is read only, it's RO. So basically when you implement this has fname, when you instantiate a new object, a person, you are required to tell it what the first name is, right? And that whatever you give for that value has to be a string. But once the object is created, this is read only, so you can't change that value after the object's been created. I think we've got an example for lazy, so I'm not going to go over that quite yet. But there's a similar format for each of these attributes, right? And if we go down a little bit further, age, you see this an integer value, weight is an integer, and then extras is actually a hash ref. So you can pass it a reference to a hash of just different, whatever you want.
Question. Are these like reserved words? There is a
required lazy, yes.
They're all reserved?
Those, yes. And so in the Moose documentation, you can see all of the available, yes, I don't know what to call it.
Types.
Types?
Yeah,
Those are,
because just like when you declare a variable, let's see, you got to say, int,
Yeah, so that's just for the is a, you can specify the types there. These are like attributes for your class attributes. But
Well, I mean,
And there's a specific set of those too.
the types are worth mentioning
Yes.
because in Perl, like you can put a number, in a variable, right?
Mhm.
A scalar. You can just throw a number in there, and then depending upon how you use it,
Mhm.
if you say, do a print, it's going to just print the text version of that, right?
Mhm.
Character. If you do math on it, it's going to go, oh, they need the numeric version of this because it'll store both of them internally, and it'll just pull out whichever one it needs, depending upon how you use it, right? So this is a departure from normal do everything for you Perl, and it's more into, this, I'm declaring this to be an integer. And then how you use it, the compiler, at runtime, it can say, this is a number. He wants to print it. Okay, I'll do a conversion and then I'll print it. But when you're getting input into that and somebody types in fudge, it's going to go, no, it's a number. I need a number, right? So it'll help you out, but it is different than how normal, Perl scripts.
So Perl is a not very strongly typed language.
Correct.
So, but this is much stronger. I mean, you have to
can't-
tell.
Well, you don't have to.
You don't have to do
You don't have to give it a type.
You don't.
It's storing scalar values, right? So this is really for type checking on when you create a new object and you pass all of these different attributes. If you specify an is-a and a type, it will do a type check on the value that you're giving it.
I see.
And if it doesn't match that type, then it will throw an error.
That's an added feature.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I can see that.
Really, all of this stuff, all of these are sort of optional, I think. I'm trying to think of anything that's actually required. I think you can just do has weight, has extra, and give
And
it
then
whatever.
fill them in as you go.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Like a hash, you can do the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that's essentially what Perl objects are. Is they are they're hashes with some extra metadata built into them.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
At least that's how I understand from the low level. But again, so Moose just adds a lot of extra functionality to, on top of the Perl objects.
Right.
But yeah, so this just makes that kind of stuff a lot easier. So once we get through all of our attributes, we get into our methods, and these are just subroutines within that package, right? But when we'll see a little bit later, once you start calling it as an object, these are, they act like methods instead of subroutines in your program.
Okay.
So your methods are essentially what behaviors that your object has, right? So an object has can do things. In this case, a person can greet, and a person can say goodbye, and you can ask them what their stats are. And each of these methods will do different things, right? So in this case, so one thing to know for regular Moose, with your methods, you don't want to start each of them, just like a regular subroutine, you would get all of the, what is it called, the arguments. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Right. Arguments. you would want to split out your arguments first. In Moose, the first argument that's sent to each of your methods is its own identity, right? It's self, right? So you'll shift out self, and then
I've always wondered about this.
Yeah.
Because I see this in other people's programs all the time. Self.
Mm-hmm.
And is that a Moose thing?
No, that's
because
sort
I
of
don't
an
use that.
object-oriented thing. That is basically within these methods. If you want to refer to itself, like you want to if this is a behavior, right? So if it's
Right.
talking about itself or it's going to modify itself somehow, then it needs to know how to call it, essentially call it in memory, right?
So what it does is, I mean, does it,
Mhm.
it opens up all of your variables and arguments
Mhm.
to your subroutines without having to pass
Right.
them individually. Is that what self does?
Yeah. So you can have multiple. So you have a class, like this is our class, right? And the class is like your blueprint, and then an object is like what you make out of that blueprint, right? So you can have
Right.
multiple. You can have one blueprint and then create multiple objects out of that,
Right.
What self does is helps Perl identify which object you're talking about, right? So if I have three person objects, right? We'll have John Fields, John Dexter, and Brian Parker, right? But they're all the same person class,
Right.
right? But each of us, when we refer to ourselves, I'm talking about John Dexter.
I understand. I understand. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So it's the same code being, implemented, but these will all know who they are.
I see.
It is actually a reference.
Yeah.
It is.
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean, I do this a lot. I pass hashes to my subroutine.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it's the same, so it's the same kind of thing,
Yeah.
but
Yep.
I pass it by reference.
Mhm.
All right, okay.
And if you're just doing, regular subroutines, not loose ones,
Right.
you can still pass in self. It's great.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
So, yeah, and then I didn't write this, so I wasn't trying to look and see if there's something in here I needed to talk about in each of these methods, but I don't. He's just doing sprint f and then referencing the attributes, and then for extras it's a hash ref for it, so it's just looping through each of the keys and
Right.
printing.
Okay.
Pretty print. So package meta make immutable. This is what really helps speed up Moose quite a bit. So Moose is very, very powerful, and you can do some weird magic with it by changing. I don't even know. Like I'm not really familiar, but you can essentially change the meta object layer on the fly. I don't know what that means, but
Well, it's Moose is Perl code, right?
yeah.
Right.
And so at runtime, like you
Yeah.
compile time or runtime,
Right.
At runtime, it's executing Moose code,
Mhm.
As kind of a wrapper around your code, right? So if you say immutable, that means I am not going to
Right.
auto update
So that
this code. You can just take it as written,
Yeah.
and so it basically gets compiled once, and you're done.
yeah.
Doesn't
So
keep reading.
I think there's ways that you can actually inject additional stuff into your object on the fly, essentially. But if you know that this object is set and this is how it needs to run and has all the attributes it needs and everything, if you put
You can create namespaces and methods on the fly. Shutting off your meta at the end of each class turns that off.
okay, yeah. So if you make that immutable, then that object or that class structure is set, and it helps Moose bypass, a lot of stuff that it might be like. Anyway, all I know is that makes it fast.
It sounds a little analogous to a C language, maybe, and linking different objects together when you compile. I mean, a little bit, not totally, but a little bit. Okay.
Very similar.
Yeah. All right.
Okay. So let's move on to our next object. So we have package server. So we're opening up a new namespace for server. Use Moose again, and so now I have has CPU, And we see similar stuff. Everything looks similar except for lazy is equal to 1 now.
True.
And builder is a new thing, and this corresponds to a method within the object, or within the class. And what lazy means is that this attribute does not get instantiated until you first call it, right? So when this attribute gets called for the first time, it will run this builder method, which will build CPU, and it'll get this value from
Right. Okay.
The
CPU input.
Yeah. So, and so we have a similar thing for build RAM, or for RAM.
So
it's
lazy
Mhm.
doesn't have a default value, right? It doesn't
Right.
really get
So-
defined until you call it.
Yeah. So with lazy, you have to, if you put lazy in here as 1, you have to either define a builder method or a default value.
I see.
Right. So
Right.
if for all these other things, yeah, so you're essentially assuming that I'm just trying to think, if it's not required, does it mean?
I just asked him.
Yeah.
I believe.
Really, but I think if you
Not
have
lazy.
lazy, you still have to have something. But anyway,
Well,
I guess required would just be if you
say it's lazy, you have to definitely be able to run whatever builds it,
yeah.
right?
Okay.
So you can have a default value, or you can have a builder method. Required would just be when you create the object, you don't have to specify. Like if you have required equals 1, then you have to specify a value when
I see.
when you create the object.
Right.
If it's required equals 0, then you don't have to.
Yeah.
And then for
So the lazy requires a default value or a builder.
So how many of these different types are available to?
there's
There's a lot.
A lot.
I mean, each one is designed to fix a particular kind of problem, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
And ultimately, most computer problems are within a a set like this. But like he was talking about these specialty tools.
Right.
That's a specialty tool.
Yeah.
I mean, the example that I that was used to teach me about lazy was you've got a development. A developer buys a bunch of land and he's going to build 100 houses, right? So he lays out the streets and he puts in the light posts and he puts in the basic infrastructure you got to have at build time, right? And you got 2 ways you can do it. One, you can build every single house and then start selling them, which is not lazy. Or you can say, I sold a house, and then you build it
Right.
when you need it. That's lazy.
I see.
So the structure, the program's all there.
All right.
It's just like, until I call that routine, I'm not going to do anything. But the moment you call that routine, house is sold,
Right.
Build it. Get the default value, call the builder.
Good example. I like that. Okay, that helps.
The documentation is really good for most.
Yeah,
and,
Perl document. Yeah.
there's a lot. There's a lot you can do with each of these attributes. You can set getter and setter values. So if you want to make your attribute read write, but not have, because there's some people say that you should never just be able to write the attribute directly. So in your code you want to put like set, and this one set weight or get weight to either get the value or set the value. So it has that built in if you wanted to do automatic in this, if you put the writer and reader value there,
Right.
it essentially creates the subroutine for you within that class. You don't have to actually write out a method for get weight or set weight. You know, you just say the reader's this one and the writer's that one. Predicate and cleaner methods.
Yeah, you may be saying that people used to do this in discrete code, right? They would write, if you had a form and you're filling it in, and then you've got this particular field has to be an integer, this particular field can be social security number.
Right.
So not numeric, but digits.
Right.
In a certain pattern, all that kind of stuff. We used to, code by hand, right? And really what that is that's like business logic, not actual programming.
Sure.
So the thing that object-oriented gets you is like you can say, like we defined a person, right? A person was first name, last name, gender, address, whatever. You can say this object is a person required, right? So all those business rules underneath get applied to the new object in toto.
Yeah.
Just like that.
Yeah.
So that takes your business logic, kind of encodes it into the code, and then you can just keep reusing it.
Makes a lot of sense.
So that's what I have to say about that.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I can see a lot of types there.
Yeah, so it's builders, laziness. Triggers.
Do you know what that is, trigger?
It says it's a subroutine that is called whenever an attribute is set. So it looks like you give it a reference to a subroutine. And you set. So
I see.
So
This really is object oriented. I can see it.
yeah. So there's a lot of stuff to help make you more efficient at coding and less have to type out less boilerplate type stuff as well. Okay, so we went over builders. That's the same. So here's some more CPU info. So CPU info. Here's some shift. Okay, so it's getting the cell. All right, so if you shift, it returns self, and then CPU. So CPU info is a getter, is a get method for.
It does the proc CPU info, counts it, right?
Yeah, so it's going to build. So if somebody calls CPU info for the server object, it's going for the first time. It's going to build it and then store it in that attribute. And then IO problem returns nothing.
Yeah.
And I guess undef. Network problem returns empty string. And then problem.
Tommy says, just a reminder, this was for a job interview.
Yeah.
That he interviews people, so he wants to see what questions they ask.
Right.
So, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is just Tommy making a joke, right? So there's never an IO problem, there's never a network problem. There's memory problems, I guess half the time.
Yep.
Or
yeah.
What is $?
Process ID?
Yeah. So okay, so the process ID is
process ID
is even, then there's a memory problem.
Yep.
Yeah.
Modulo.
So,
That percentage margin.
Right, yeah, so there's that. And then we have employee class. And in this one, we have an extends, which is the keyword for inheritance in Moose. So employee extends.
Always says, here be inheritance.
So employee
Mhm.
is a person.
Is a person.
But a person doesn't have to be an employee.
Correct.
Right, yeah,
Okay.
exactly, yeah.
Right.
So
yeah.
it's going to get everything that makes a person plus everything else that's included in here.
Okay.
Right? So it's going to get all the attributes of person plus employer, this employee ID, and their job title. Right? And
So to the code, employee is going to look exactly the same, as a person. It'll be self and then first name.
Right.
Right? If it's an employee class. You don't have to go like self, person, name.
Right.
Say that again.
So
when you're dealing with the object-oriented, a lot of people think about the Russian stacking dolls, and thing inside of thing inside of thing.
Right.
Yeah, sort of. When you're extending, what you're saying is I'm basically making a copy of that thing and I'm adding more to it.
Right. Okay.
So, employee, fat comma, the arrow, and then F name, first name, right?
Right.
So you can have person, first name, and then you would also the exact same way have employee, first name.
Well, so I don't have to. When I use that, I don't have to go all the way down
No.
with all the names.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
This
okay.
is just an employee, but it just
like that.
inherits
Okay.
everything.
All right.
Yeah, so that's the big
Alright.
deal about inheritance. Is
Yeah.
that you're making, a copy plus whatever.
And
All right.
inheritance is what allows you to do code reuse, right? So you'll have something, like you said, all employees are people, are a person, but not every person is an employee. So you can have a person that's a customer, or a person that's a salesperson, I don't know, like ninja, whatever.
Lots of people, and they all do different things.
Exactly. And
Right.
so you're adding different behaviors and different attributes to a person, and then that person then becomes an employee. Right?
Good.
So we see in here for title something interesting in that there's the default used, and this is basically saying if you create this object and do not specify a title, it will automatically give you a default value of an employee.
Okay.
And defaults are a little weird because you pass a subroutine to default.
I can see that.
And instead of just a value, because that way you can.
Now wait a minute. New employee is not a subroutine. You're just filling in that value by calling an inline sub like that.
Right. Yeah. So it's an anonymous sub, but that way you can work with different types and.
I got you. Okay.
Maths or whatever if you need to. Okay, so, and then after. This is greet, right? So we have a greet method of in person right here, right?
Right.
And an employee inherits greet. So when you create an employee object, it's going to get this method as well. So whenever you call greet, it's going to say, hello, I'm, first name, middle name, and last name, right? What this is saying, after greet, run this code also. So after you run the code from person, also run this. So
I don't have to call it explicitly. It does it automatically.
So it's getting greet automatically from person, right? So it's inheriting greet method. And then, since this is an employee, you want to find out where they work for, right? Or they're going to say who they work for as well. So after they run the greet from person, it'll run this code block. There's before, after, and around.
Around?
Yeah, so you can do something before and after. Yeah. Cool. So I think we've got an example of an around.
Cool.
So troubleshooter is a role. Okay. So roles are also called mixins in C++. And I think other languages that have something similar to role. Essentially, what a role is a bit of code that essentially you can inject into an object without using inheritance. Right? So sometimes inheritance doesn't always work.
Right.
Because so the example I read that kind of explained why you have roles is that you start doing the classic example of in object-oriented programming with animals. And so you have your superclass, which is like animal, right?
Right.
All animals have legs, but then birds are animals, but birds have wings, right? And then there's penguins and seagulls, and both penguins and seagulls are birds, and they both have wings, but only seagulls fly. Right?
And this is how you deal with that.
Yeah, and so this is something, so you can say, well, why don't we just create a role called flying, or flies, or something like that.
Doesn't fly, or anything like that.
So this one's called troubleshooter, but you can add. Okay, so troubleshooter in this case just adds a additional method, right? So, but do you understand like the concept of a role versus so?
Well, you can. I want to think. Well, there are exceptions, but they're really not. It's kind of like you gave a good example with animals.
Yeah.
It goes farther down than just a species. It's different kinds of, it's different roles. It's different characteristics.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I understand that.
Roles can have attributes and methods, and it also has a cool thing that's not shown here, but it can require specific things in the object.
Right.
So you can say, you can add this role, but we'll say troubleshooter, but if you use troubleshooter, this object has to have a server, right?
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
But it's not shown here, but that's what you would probably do in this case was, since it, obviously it's going to look for self-server object. You say that the object that implements this role requires server. Anyway, we'll look at how it's implemented here. So here we go with another object for sysadmin. It extends employee, so it's inheriting person and employee.
Tommy's like, may I chime in?
Yes.
Okay.
Hold on.
Let's talk about roles.
Okay, great. Like Dexter was explaining, I mean, that was a really great explanation with the animals. Roles are very simply explained as saying that they're capabilities that you can give to someone. For example, you can make a role and call it superpowers. and you can give it to a person, and you can say that that person now has laser vision and can fly. Or you can say that that person's role is a policeman and that he pulls people over who have a headlight out on their way to Perl Mongers meetings. Just saying. So I mean, these are examples of roles. Roles are just capabilities, and they aren't deep like the inheritance. I mean, because you see here on Dexter's screen how it says it extends employee. At this point, we're 2 levels deep in the inheritance, and that's great. But sometimes inheritance goes crazy when you've got vast hierarchies of objects, and as Dexter was explaining, and the problem that you want to avoid with inheritance is if you're ever inheriting more than 2 levels deep, you're probably doing something wrong, and you need to understand that it introduces a lot of overhead for the compiler to try to figure out what you want when you want to inherit something, because it tries to figure out, well, do you want to inherit from here or here or here or here or here? Which direction up the tree or do I go? Because it's not a ladder. When you've got a hierarchy of inheritance and other things inheriting from other parent classes and superclasses, you end up with a big mess and a lot of overhead. So inheritance, as you've seen, allows us, code reuse, which is A+. Inheritance, and I encourage people to use inheritance, and I use inheritance as well. But when you can use a role, jump on the chance, because you're going to be saving CPU cycles, and you're going to be giving yourself yet another option, yet another way to reuse code. Because down the line, you might want to give superpowers to something else, like a dog. Superman has a dog. That's all I have to say about that. Just roles were emphasized very, very strongly as the better way of doing things in object orientation than complex hierarchies of inheritance. And when you're building a large code base for example, a corporation, you end up with a lot of code. After a year, you've developed an application. They want you to continue add features. So you're adding more features, you're adding more code, and you're adding more classes, and you're adding more inheritance, and things can get really hairy. Not only do you have to trace those not only does the compiler have to trace those inheritance hierarchies, you have to figure out what's inheriting from what. And that can become a real pain in the butt when you're working with 3 or 4 people or coming behind somebody who left code that you have to maintain and had a crazy inheritance model. So use the roles. I want to stress that. And basically, when I stress that, I'm just echoing the advice of the greats, the people who are in the know, who are actively developing Perl itself right now, and the object-oriented community at large.
Okay, that the roles thing is something that's unique to Perl, or that's not common in object-oriented programming? Or?
Yeah, so it's not unique, but it is. You don't find it in all. Like
you don't.
I don't think Python has a way to add roles. And I could be wrong. I'm not an expert in most languages.
Well, it's like you've got inheritance, and extending, right? Which is great. But roles are kind of extending,
right?
But, so after people got used to the idea and the concept of extension, then somebody said, roles are actually a more refined version of that. So we've got them both.
Yeah. So the way some languages work or do it without roles is they'll have multiple inheritance. So you'll have 2 classes and both get inherited. So you could have give an example for this, but I don't know. There's not a good way to explain it, but you would essentially have one class that implements your basic structure and then another class that essentially would be a role that you would say inherits from or extends both of these. So then they both get kind of smashed together. Instead of having, this inherits, this class inherits from this class, and there's like a direct line, you start having multiple lines of classes inheriting. But roles simplifies that because you can use the same role anywhere.
You can use roles you can use the same role for different classes, can't you?
Yeah.
So that's where really seems to me like that's where the benefit comes in.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right.
Tommy says Python no. It's kind of special. Ruby sort of.
Is Ruby?
So when you're comparing, and that's the thing, when you're comparing scripting languages, PHP.
Right. Not even close.
Yeah. But so Perl is kind of straddling, the normal areas of expertise.
Yeah. So Perl, so Moose and Perl 6 are essentially pulling the best of a lot of different languages into it. All right. So roles are not original to Perl, but they've been parts of other languages. They're just a good idea, so we should put it in, and they did.
So Tommy says, experience and a gut feeling will tell you whether you need a class or a role. And then also, be advised, you cannot create objects from role classes. Right. It's a technical bit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So a role. Yeah. Right. So a role has to be part of an object or a class. So if we look at our sysadmin class, right? So we're extending employee and with troubleshooter. So with is the keyword for adding a role to your class, right? So troubleshooter
I see.
is our And the only Perl 6 makes this a lot easier to understand, like when you're looking at the code, because it says it uses words like class and the class name, and then role and the role name. Whereas in Perl 5, we have to kind of create a package namespace and say use Moose role, which then creates a role out of that namespace, right? Out of that package. Correct me if I'm not using the right terminology, John.
No, I think it's right.
Okay. So we're extending employee with the role troubleshooter, and now we have has a server. So a sysadmin has everything that an employee has, but it also has a server. And around the troubleshoot method, which we got from our role.
Before and after.
Right. It's going to execute this code block. And the way this one works is a little bit different. So we have around, a little bit unique. When I said the first argument that you always got in your method is self. In this case, it's original or the origin. What do you call it? It's going to be the original method call, right?
The second shift or the first shift?
The first shift. So it's going to be, and this is kind of weird. So
yeah,
what it's going to do is it's going to say this. I've been asked to check performance on server. This is okay. Self forage. This is what executes the original troubleshoot method. Right. And then it's going to do this. So that's how the around works, is you get the reference to this forage, which essentially is the method call. Right, so that's how you implement an around. It's a little confusing, but it's there mostly just to show you if that's something that you need to do, it's available.
There's no way to do that just in regular Perl, is there?
Like an around?
No, I'm thinking find out what subroutine called another subroutine. I mean, it sounds, that's just a little bit like that. It's
Right, I mean,
because it's a
it's-
method.
yeah.
You're finding out what method it is that is in use.
So, yes, just keep in mind, this is all in Perl. So yes,
Yeah,
there is a way to do it.
there's-
Right.
However, is it easy or trivial?
Well,
So, I mean, you, this
Call
scrolled
it.
up.
Dash F color. So that's how you do it.
been looking for that for years.
Now,
The color. Turns context or your pros.
but if I remember right, sifting through the results of that is coming along. Is that right? It's been forever since I've actually used color.
It's handy for debugging.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I used it for. So, yes, there's a way to do it.
Yeah.
But just look at how nice Moose makes that.
Right.
Right. And debugging gets a lot easier because you have your objects and you can set up your logging so that it shows what, object and what method and stuff with
Sure.
in your stack traces and stuff. And so your objects should be as simple as possible so that you'll know where to go to look for the bugs.
Okay.
If it starts getting too complicated, then you might think, well, should I split this into different class?
Right.
Right. Like, should there be a higher level class?
Same way you would with subroutines.
Right.
Yep.
Right. You want to break it down into simpler
Mm-hmm.
components.
Okay.
Okay.
1 foot down, or 2 foot down, or 3 foot down.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Debugger. Yeah.
Nice gives you an automatic stack trace for Moose, but they're deep. Yeah, don't be afraid.
Yeah. Moose stack traces can be a little
Daunting.
And one thing that Moose does, which is kind of weird for your stack trace, like in your errors, is that the line numbering gets messed up. So it'll say on line blah blah blah. There's an error, and you go back to your code and you look at that line,
Oh no.
and it's not there.
Oh no.
So that's one thing to be warned about. But yeah, you can use Perl debugger, and there's
Same way you put a regular Perl program without
Yeah.
Moose, you can still use the debugger. Step through things
Yeah.
and all
Oh,
that.
yeah.
Okay.
It's all Perl.
Right.
Yeah.
All right.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So here's, and at the bottom here, this is where we're actually executing our program. All right. So we're going to call Harvey, and this is sysadmin new.
He's an employee and a person.
Mm-hmm. And you'll notice that this new method call is just given to us for free, right? At no point in our sysadmin do we define
Right.
a new method, right? And that's the same with every Moose object.
Okay.
That constructor method is automatically baked in.
All right.
So it's got a first name, last name, and age from our person class, extras from our person class.
Yeah, line 238. Tell me it's saying like, go to line 138, go to line 238. So pointing out something.
The server.
We need to.
Notice type check.
Oh, right. So yeah. So we defined a server class, right? Yeah, right up here. All right, so we have a package server. Inside of a sysadmin class, that object has a server, and it is a type server, which is what we defined earlier. All right, so if we create a new sysadmin and give it a server, it's going to type check that attribute
Right.
and make sure that it is of a server class.
Okay. All right.
Not required, however.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, we don't have to pass it to. We don't have to give it a server when we create the object, but if we do assign a server, then it'll be type check.
Okay.
Yeah. So here we go. We have a sysadmin. It has all of these attributes, right?
Excuse me.
Mhm.
I use these all the time if I'm using the CPAN module or something. I can't think of any examples right now, but they're all doing this stuff if they're using this new. Is that specific to Moose?
That's common to most object-oriented.
It is.
Yeah. So new is sort of the standard constructor method
In Perl then?
in Perl and a lot of different languages.
Right. Okay.
Some languages require you to create your own constructor classes. And in core Perl, you have to create the constructor also.
Yeah.
But Moose creates that new method for you.
All right. Okay.
You're going to get the benefit of all the type checking and
Right.
It's like you got to tell it, you got to declare it.
Mm-hmm.
This is a new person object.
Right.
This is a new server object.
Right.
This is a new employee object.
Okay.
Yeah.
So since you have to do that, Moose just says, okay.
Yeah.
And all the code's already there.
Right. So and then you give it you call the new method, and then you pass all of the attribute values as a hash, right? And you could do extras for a hash reference, right? So you're sending a reference to a hash here. That's pretty standard, right? So now we have a object called Harvey, and we can call the greet method. And so we'll see what greet does in a second when we run it.
We're getting down into the nuts and bolts here now.
So now we're going to create a server object, server new,
Right.
and it has an IP and a host name.
Right.
Right there. And then Harvey, since he is a sysadmin, we can have a server as well. And so we can assign this server to Harvey and tell Harvey to troubleshoot. And then Harvey says goodbye. Perfect. And then there's pod.
So greet, server, troubleshoot, by, those are all methods.
Do them before, yeah.
Yeah. But that's the terminology for those things, right?
Yeah.
Method.
So when we run it, so this is our output, right? Hello, I'm Harvey McHelpful. So this is where you're giving us a briefing, right? And I work for a great company, Frontline. So since it's an employee, the after is part of the greet here.
Oh, yeah.
So there's that after method.
It didn't follow.
Oh, yeah. Well, on this one. Can I just do desktop?
Yeah, he's in the background.
All right. So, right. So we have that after method there that's showing up, and then we're calling we had greet, right? And then we created the server and then assigned it to Harvey, and then we asked Harvey to troubleshoot, right? So troubleshoot says I've been asked to check problems on server that found CPU issues for 10 minutes ago. This problem fixed. So that's all based in that troubleshooter. Troubleshooter role. So I found CPU issue. Yeah. So it's calling on that server. It had all those different methods that were returning
Right.
true and false. And so it's doing, it was doing Tommy's little joke methods, right? And telling us, yeah. So and then around. So here's the around, right? So
Right.
we called the troubleshoot, and it says I've been asked to check for problems on that server in the host name, and then is okay self urge, and that's going to run that troubleshooter role.
Right.
And if return was 1 is okay, then it says my work here is done. Otherwise, it says escalate. So what we saw was
We saw all that happen. Yeah.
And then goodbye.
You guys aren't old enough to remember the days. I mean, when I worked for a couple airlines, and we used to have code, stacks of paper. It was this long, okay? And we had these guys running around that knew it from start to finish. If you lost one of these guys, you were dead, But this is really a way. Is really a way to simplify. I mean, if you have a complex application, this is the way to bottle it down and really maintain it and develop much more effectively. I can see that.
So, and we stole that, right?
You stole it. Yeah.
Genius steals.
It does. Just like art. Art does too. Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you on that. Yeah, I mean, you're telling me all this stuff, and I'm just, because right now, what I'm working on is getting to be a spaghetti code.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think of ways to apply this, and they're just, I'm just going through them one by one in my head.
Yeah.
And it'll enable me to do a lot more also. It'll enable me to do better analysis, is what I can see.
Because you're defining the problem partially in the code.
Yeah.
So the guy, Chris, he recommended the declarative syntax of MOOPs, M-O-O-P-S. It implements tiny mouse moves under the hood and seamlessly promotes move classes to moves when appropriate. I don't have experience with moves myself.
So MOOPS. All right.
Straight up Moose doesn't have, that many performance issues. But if you've got something that you really need to get tighter,
right. Right.
Yeah. Or if you're creating a whole lot of objects, I was trying to think of if you're doing financial, you're saying doing data analysis. If you created an object for each point of your data, maybe you could run into memory problems or something, and some more lightweight.
The startup time of this program is really where it goes.
Yeah.
So when it loads.
Yeah, it's doing a lot of work, loading a lot of modules.
Does it save any of it in cache, like if you're redoing things over and over again?
Yeah, once it's loaded.
Once it's loaded, yeah, that's fine. And that's what this, make immutable line really helps a lot with the load time.
Yes.
So it doesn't have to search forward to see if you're going to change the class later.
Right. Right.
That kind of stuff.
Good stuff.
Yeah, Tommy, it says, Perl is basically, it's essentially compiled, so it's in the bytecode, it's the fastest compiled C.
Right.
So
And I don't know. That's not what I wanted. That's not fun.
I know that C10 minus, that's, so if you want to install modules, like just under your user ID or something, that is. Method.
Yeah, so I don't know if people would recommend this or not. Okay.
method signature, yeah, I would say that's the second, you know.
All right.
Let the other stuff sink in first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
My
it's
computer's about to die. I'm going to have to leave.
good,
Yeah.
but it's deep.
All right.
You really gotta know the other stuff first.
Yeah. Okay. And this one I don't know because I heard this one uses double declare, which I think is supposedly it's been described as a bag of crack. So it may get deprecated anyway. But I like method signatures.
So you have an idea of how to create or declare an object. You have an idea of how to wrap it in, you know, do this, like define a method, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then just call it by name, and it does whatever the method says.
I have to think about how I would apply it. Got myself in so deep with what I'm doing. It's like, you know, where would I start?
Low hanging fruit.
Yeah.
Any time you're gonna take a piece of software and you're gonna refactor it, right? It's the same process.
Let's do it a piece at a time.
And then about the third time you refactor it, you're there, right? I mean, because it's the old story about the consultant, like who knows the big picture. He comes in and he just totally redoes it, like all object oriented, say, from the old one.
Right.
And he just ends up encapsulating the really, clever bits as the actual methods that do stuff. But nobody can understand how it works.
Right.
Right. So you got that process, you go through. You bring everybody up a little bit, and you bring the code into shape, and bring everybody up a little bit, or less code as it may be. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, you don't have to do the whole thing at once.
Mm-hmm.
And every time you refactor it, you'll just squeeze more performance and make it simpler.
Right. Right. I'm trying to put all my stuff on the web too, so I can really see where this would help with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you said you worked with Catalyst a little bit.
Yes.
Yeah. Have you used any of the other ones? like Dancer? Or
I think I went through Modulistic.
Yeah.
I went through a few of them and I settled on Catalyst. And all I really did was go through half a dozen tutorials or something.
I've been using Mojo, and I've grown to like it a lot.
Really?
Yeah.
I like Mojo.
It has its own, you know, object-oriented system, which is very Moose-like.
Hmm.
So if you know Moose or don't know Moose, when you do Mojo, you'll be fine. But it's super lightweight. The thing about Mojo is that you don't have to install any dependencies.
Right.
You set up Catalyst and you're installing dependencies.
It was a big install, if I remember.
Yeah. I mean, it does a lot. I built a huge app with Tommy, actually, in Catalyst. And it was great. You know, it was fast and everything was properly, spread out. But if I'm doing a small website, I might not go to Catalyst first.
Right.
Because it's yeah. Chris here says Dancer 2, big fan of Dancer 2.
So they're all the same kind of thing then.
Yeah. It used to be in the Perl world that you write a passage was making some kind of text parser, and nowadays it seems to be making a web framework. It's you got to do that at least once. So there's a lot out there. Yeah, and so if you have Dancer or Mojo or Catalyst questions, there's certainly people who can get on the list.
All right.
Yeah.
Good.
All right. Any other questions, or turn it back over to Tommy? Or?
I'm good.
I think we've got 10 minutes left.
I'm good.
All right. You want to mute Mr. Dexter?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, Brian, it's been a pleasure. We hope to see you again, me with my eyes instead of my computer webcam, next month. We meet on the second Wednesday of every month at 7 o'clock. So it's kind of hump day for the month, and Sean and I always get a kick out of that joke. Anyhow, for anybody listening in or watching on YouTube later on, please join our non-commercial mailing list at dfw-pm@pm.org. Or you can follow us on Google Plus by going to google.com/+DFW Perl Mongers. Again, thanks for everybody who came out. I want to thank Dexter. I mean, you guys, you're awesome. Dex, you really helped me out a lot. And Chris, welcome as well. Come again. And always bring a friend. Bring a laptop. I mean, bring a beer if you'd like. We'll see you guys.